Right, so hopefully we should all now be able to see on the screen my full screen. And the two topics we're going to discuss tonight. So kind of just what I was alluding to there. Last week we kind of touched on sort of foundations of nutrition and possibly where to start. So me presenting some options to you. So this week we're going to take a look at MyFitnessPal and really how to use it effectively and simply to help drop well, I put on the title 1 to 2 kilograms of body fat every 30 days. It just depends on how much you want to get into your nutrition and or training. But what I would say to that is the approach that, well, I guess I take with the nutrition coaching members here. It's one where if the member wants to use MyFitnessPal, we do get some pretty great results off it. And I'm going to explain why that happens as we move forward. Sorry, I'm just entering someone else into the group. As we move forward throughout the webinar. Then we're going to touch on looking at habits and maybe how to actually, when you are thinking about building on a new habit or generating a new habit, whatever that might be, how to go about it in a certain way, which will hopefully make you stick to it a little bit better. So for the first part, like I said a minute ago, if you saw last week's webinar, we're going to refer, I will refer you back to that ball ache scale that I presented. And I use that quite a lot because it touches on what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. So I'm assuming, having a few of you here tonight, that in terms of your nutrition, in terms of your tracking, you've kind of thought about that and thought, right, well, I might use MyFitnessPal. And really, there's plenty of ways to skin a cat. If I'm honest, there's MyFitnessPal works for some people, doesn't work for other people. That like any particular method, it's got to be one that you believe in, one that you've been sort of educated on, one that you've been shown guidance on what to do, and it really one that you can trust in. So that's the first sort of point here to put it into context. There's plenty of things that work. Tonight we're just going to touch on the MyFitnessPal because that's one particular way that we use to track the nutrition here. So the topics we're going to cover is, like we did last week, 99 problems, but my nutrition, I should say isn't one. For most people, nutrition, it isn't. They think it's their problem, but it's not. It's more of a management thing and how they're managing themselves. We're going to touch on my little metaphor for horse blinkers, which are those, well, the things that they put on like police horses and stuff when they're walking down the road so they can't see the cars to their side. It'll all make it a bit more sense later, don't worry. Then we're going to touch on my other little metaphor. It's become clear to me that I tend to use metaphors when explaining things quite a lot. We're going to touch on tracing paper and how that can be linked to a slight shift in your mindset when it comes to nutrition. And then hopefully your outcomes from this first part is you're going to understand basically that how a diet works and how all those diets work, whether it's keto, Slimming World, whatever. Essentially what the end game is on those diets. Then we're going to look at how to establish control over your results, and that's where something like MyFitnessPal might come in. And then we're going to look at a couple of things that you probably want to be checking out on if you are using MyFitnessPal. One of them being all that really matters is your weekly average. So hopefully those points, those topics and outcomes will make a little bit more sense. So when I was thinking about doing this webinar, I was trying to think about the problems that I've seen over the last, 11 years now. It's come up to 11 years that I've been doing this. And first and foremost, like I touched on a minute ago, the problems when it comes to nutrition isn't normally nutrition that's the problem. And that's really what I'm trying to educate most people on, and why I'm passionate about nutrition is because I'm passionate about trying to remove a lot of the bullshit that's out there, a lot of the conflicting information, and trying to get people to realize that they know everything they need to know about already with nutrition. It's more about that they probably struggle with the management of their nutrition around their busy lifestyles, because we've all got certain areas of our lifestyles on high heat. such as work. Work takes up a lot of our time and energy, such as maybe looking after the kids, such as trying to do whatever else. And now you're trying to get some nutrition going and some training going, and you're wondering why maybe you're struggling with that. It's because you've got a lot going on elsewhere. So my job here is to try and make things simple for you and maybe try and guide you in a way that maybe you've not been shown before, or maybe that you've not seen in diet books or whatever. Then I think the second thing is people maybe don't understand the principles of maybe how a diet works. And what I mean by that is, more often than not, and from the experience that I've had, people, it seems like we just kind of get given the rules, or we get given the meal plan, and we kind of just head down, crack on, and hope for the best. And I'm humble enough to say that, like, when I first started doing all this, like 11 years ago, I would give people meal plans that were, looking back on it, it's just cringy, but I'd get members on meal plans, and they would go and follow that to the T for like 6 weeks or whatnot, and they're eating all the meals that I've put on the meal plan, and then they get great results, and it's all like, oh yeah, well done, fantastic. And then on week 7 and on week 8, they're wondering why they're now struggling to maintain those particular nutrition plan or whatnot. And it's because they just lived like a monk for the last 6 weeks. They've not had a social life. They've not actually learned any proper tools and habits and behaviors to build their own nutrition. They've just been reading off a plan. And I think that's still quite prominent in the kind of health and fitness world, is that people rely on that, or we go to that and we look for that. And that's not necessarily, or in my opinion, it's definitely not the answer for long-term sort of sustainable change. And that's a good point to note. This is all about long-term stuff. Guys, this is about your health in the long term, building on foundations of good quality health. So really the end goal is we're pushing away any visits to the doctors, keeping away health and disease. And that's really the underlying principle behind why I'm even having this conversation. And that's the motivation behind me doing this sort of stuff, is to try and make you guys, and one bit at a time, slightly healthier. So we are pushing away hospital visits and doctor's visits and whatnot. And then maybe third point is, someone's had previous success in the past, but they struggle to maintain it. Maybe they were restricting themselves or doing some form of suffering, if you will. And then that diet sort of comes to an end. Like my example there, the 6-week diet with members in the past might have come to an end. And then how do you take control from there on and take the reins? Because most diets, the word itself kind of assumes it's a short-term thing. When you're talking about a diet, it tends to allude to having an end point. And really the stuff that we're all trying to take ownership of here is a nutrition plan that, it shouldn't really have an end point. This is like life. That's a bit of a, what's the word? Maybe as cringy as that sounds, but that's really what we're getting at. And then, so really with that being said, like, how many of you could this be? And it doesn't have to be a full stack shelf of recipe books or diet books. It might just be a few, but what I'm trying to get at here is how many of you have kind of fallen victim over the years of different fatty things, like that purple one there, the new abs diet. I mean, like, what a load of bullshit. Or the Daniel plan, like, who the hell is Daniel? Look good, feel great, all that silly stuff. And that sums up like nutrition and diet. So no wonder when a new member comes in to Thrive, and I'm like trying to get them sat down for a nutrition session, and I can almost see the apprehension in their eyes, probably because they've been through this process, they've seen all this sort of stuff, and it creates this whole sort of negativity around nutrition, and sort of like the lifestyle way of eating and whatnot. So we're really trying to eradicate that and trying to move out of that approach of going around in a bit of a cycle, a negative cycle of hopping from one thing to another, and never really taking any sort of control over the nutrition. So we're trying to move that conflicting opinions. So when it actually comes to like diets, if you will, sorry, trying a bit of water. When it comes to diets, if you will, they all really have the same end game. So it doesn't really matter what particular diet that you might have followed in the past, or maybe that you like following. Like I said at the start, this is only one way to skin a cat. I'm just trying to provide you with information. So if you've got a particular way of doing things like intermittent fasting or whatever, or you like doing Weight Watchers, that's fine. At the end of the day, it's doing something that you believe in and that you get results in, as long as it's for the long term and as long as it doesn't provide too much suffering or restriction. But as long as you understand that the way every diet works is essentially, it puts you, the end game, it puts you in that calorie deficit. And I'll touch on that a little bit more, because the calorie deficit is way more, is a complicated thing to talk about. And I think if you follow stuff on, I don't know, Instagram or Facebook, whatever, anything to do with health and fitness, you might have seen the term calorie deficit thrown out there a lot. And it's probably overused, and it's tried to make losing weight and dieting sound really simple. And we all know it's not a simple thing. There's so many different caveats and so many different individual things that comes into dropping weight and dropping body fat. But as long as you start to understand that essentially all a diet does is it puts you in a calorie deficit. And what we mean by that is essentially the energy that you're putting into your body. So the food and drink that's going into the body in the form of calories is slightly less than you're expending. Okay, so that is what a calorie deficit is, if you're unaware. But all these diets, whether it's keto there, for example, a keto diet just gets you essentially just to remove carbohydrates. You have a high protein and high fat diet, and that removal of carbohydrates is essentially putting you in a calorie deficit, because it's asking you to eat less carbohydrates. Therefore, you just eat less. You're making decisions which are allowing you to eat less, which puts you into that calorie deficit. And then once you're in that calorie deficit, you start dropping body fat. Now, my problem is with diets is essentially diets are, all a diet is, it's a bunch of rules that Dr. Daniel there on the first slide has come up with based on X, Y, or Z for you to follow. And that's why I like to try and move people away from diets, or at least try and educate people with diets, because you're almost like a horse with blinkers when it comes to dieting. You've been given this diet by someone, and you've got to follow rule A, B, and C, and it's almost like head down, crack on. You're not really taking in the peripheral at all. All you're doing is following those particular rules. Now, if you're following particular rules, that probably means that's only going to last for a certain amount of time. So if we were to go back to our previous diet, let's just keep it on the keto example. I'm like my horse blinkers. I'm following a diet where I'm getting myself into a calorie deficit by just removing carbohydrates. Now, that doesn't provide you with much ownership or control around your diet, because that is essentially some form of restriction / suffering. And at some point, you are going to come out of that, because in that particular case, there's probably no chance of you having a no carb diet forever. And that's where I feel where a lot of people go wrong, is they don't take the time to educate themselves, or they don't put themselves in an environment like you guys have to be shown the right tools and methods to sustainably follow a diet and put you into the calorie deficit. So coming back to that almost horse blinkers idea, is that's where the trap a lot of people fall into. It's almost head down, right, these are my rules that I've been given. I'm going to follow this until the buzzer goes, and at some point you're going to be that ticking time bomb where it's only going to last, it might be 6 weeks, it might be 6 months or whatever, but at some point those particular rules aren't going to fall into your lifestyle, and it becomes a challenge to be able to maintain that. And that's really where people go with it, is they find a diet that has particular rules that suits them. I don't know, like intermittent fasting, for example, that might work with someone who, I don't know, might work nights or something like that. So they can use their night shift as their fasting period. And that's the mistake that we make, is we fall into these categories. We put ourselves into this almost diet category, and we have these rules to live by. But in the long run, it becomes impractical and unsustainable. So as soon as we start to take, or as soon as we start to understand the principles to how a diet works and how to achieve that calorie deficit, then we can almost start to take a bit more ownership. We remove the blinkers, and we can almost start to build our own diet, which is the most important thing. Now, if we know, like I said a few minutes ago, we know that principle, what we're trying to do with our diet is achieve that calorie deficit. We've seen that a minute ago with the slide with the diets on. The end game is to achieve that calorie deficit. And like I said before, and just to reiterate it again, a calorie deficit is essentially where we're losing body fat because our energy intake is lower than our energy output. And what we're really trying to do here is to set ourselves up in a way where we've got all the control over that. And that's where maybe something like MyFitnessPal allows us to do that, compared to having our horse blinkers on and just getting into that calorie deficit with minimal control because we're following Dr. Daniel's low carb keto diet. So what we're really trying to focus on here is managing ourselves accordingly, where we're focusing on what's going into the body. So the energy or the calories that are going into the body. And when it comes to what's going out of the body, yes, we're keeping an eye on that, but we're right now the main focus, and the way I go about it with nutrition coaching is just to focus on what's going into the body at the moment, managing and controlling our energy intake that's coming in. And that's where MyFitnessPal may well be of use to you, because you're starting to use it as a food diary. As long as you use it in a certain way, which I'll come to shortly, we allow ourselves to essentially track all the energy that's coming into our body. And then it's just a simple case of following our tracking method, and then matching that alongside how our results are going, whether you're using the InBody scanner here at the gym, or maybe you're just simply taking your weight. So we know the end game so far. So we know we're trying to achieve that calorie deficit. We know we're trying to take as much ownership of that as possible. We understand how kind of all diets work. And we're trying to remove those blinkers, not fall into that trap of kind of head down, crack on, follow a certain amount of rules, because we know at some point we're probably going to be a ticking time bomb, whether it's 6 months, 6 weeks, 6 years. Those rules at some point probably aren't going to fit into our lifestyle. So it's about creating a nutrition plan and managing ourselves accordingly to a particular nutrition plan that actually fits into our lifestyle, whatever we've got going on. And that's where it becomes, I really try and reiterate a point, this point here, it becomes a bit of a mindset shift of, right, if we know that I'm trying to manage my energy intake, we know it's in the form of calories. We now know as long as I get my energy intake right to the point where it's slightly less than what's going out, all that really matters right now, and this is like the sort of initial mindset shift, is we're not worried too much about what's going into the body. Because when I say this to the members here, I can almost guarantee here when someone's starting out with their nutrition coaching, then they know what they need to be eating. We all know that. We established that last week. So therefore it becomes a mindset shift of, no, let's not worry too much. We all know what healthy food is, and everyone's already expressed that to me. Let's not worry too much about what we're having. Now let's move to this is the tracing paper metaphor. Let's move to sort of a management system of how much we're actually having. And all I'm trying to allude to here is tracing paper. The MyFitnessPal is almost like your tracing paper. The MyFitnessPal is going to direct you over those lines to that end goal, to whereby on the tracing paper you end up drawing a lovely picture, or in this case we get into that calorie deficit and we get to that end goal of dropping some body fat. So to kind of say that again, we want to take that mindset shift, especially when you're new to all this sort of stuff, of worrying about what you're eating too much, because we all know that we're all doing our best to eat a certain way, and we're all going to eat the foods that we have. And remember last week we spoke about trying to eat single ingredient foods 80% of the time, but also 20% of the time include those foods that you might class as indulgent foods. So moving away from worrying about that too much, but moving into a mindset shift of, right, what I need to do is actually maybe address the ball leg scale, which I'm assuming you guys have had. You then make the decision, right, I'm going to use MyFitnessPal. My focus right now is, whilst I'm using MyFitnessPal, all my focus is, and my primary goal is to use it as a tool to track myself as accurate as possible so that I'm consistently dropping body fat. And that's all it comes down to. And that's the end game, and that's the goal. And that's the initial mindset shift. And don't get me wrong, as we move forward for our nutrition coaching here, once someone gets into a regular routine of, right, I feel happy with my tracking now, I've formed that habit, I'm consistent with that. I'm also dropping body fat because I've seen that on the InBody scanner, and my results are getting there. Once I feel happy with that and confident with that, the next stage is, right, well, let's start to worry about then, like those particular foods. Let's start tailoring that diet a little bit more to the individual. Because like I alluded to last week, where most people go wrong initially with their nutrition, they're so worried about what they're eating, the left side of this picture, that they go away and try and eat the healthiest diet, or they follow the best nutrition plan, yet they have no control or no scope of how many calories that they're having. And then they kind of just hope for the best, where really, as long as we get the calorie intake right initially, that's when the results are going to come. Okay. So it's moving from that mindset shift of not worrying too much about what you're eating at the moment, but getting into a habit and getting into a position where you're tracking yourself. And if you've not seen last week's video, I'd recommend you go back and touch on that. And there's a couple of pointers there on where to start. But I'm assuming you guys on this call, you're all on MyFitnessPal. That's your starting point. And we just want to look at it as a tool, like our tracing paper tool, to give us some direction and give us some control over our nutrition, so we remove any guesswork when it comes to our results. So from there, what are we really trying to establish when it comes to using MyFitnessPal? Well, the first one is control. Hands on the steering wheel. When it comes to using MyFitnessPal, it's going to give you a load of control, because assuming you fill it in as accurate as possible, you're going to see exactly where you're at in terms of your calorie intake, and then you can nicely match that up with the results that you're getting, opposed to essentially just winging it, just eating a particular way and then getting results, but not really knowing how you got those results. And I think that's a good sort of habit for the future. If you know how you got a certain result, well, you can replicate it. If you don't, then it becomes a little bit more challenging. From there, the second part to using MyFitnessPal is it becomes, essentially easy to track. We have a lot of success with this with the nutrition coaching members, and those particular members get to a certain point whereby they know roughly what they're trying to achieve calorie intake wise, and they know if they do that each week, they're probably going to see a drop of body fat of 1 to 2% per month. It becomes a really simple formula once we get this process nailed down and once we get this process right. So that's the position we want to get to. You've got control. You can easily match it to your results. And the final part is it essentially moves any extreme sort of diet changes. It removes that mindset of, oh, it's Monday or it's the start of January, I'm going to go and do dry January, I'm going to go and do no takeaway January, I'm going to go and do 5 different things at once. No, let's pull away from that mindset, because we know that mindset's not achievable. Let's get ourselves to a mindset of, right, I'm just going to start doing my tracking as honest as I can and start figuring out roughly where I should be calorie intake wise, and then start matching that and seeing how I get on with my results, and then start going from there and building essentially little and positive changes bit by bit, week on week. So a couple of key points to how to use MyFitnessPal effectively is, first things first, the penny jar metaphor. If you're going to use MyFitnessPal, and last week I kind of put it on the right side of the ball leg scale, so it takes that little bit of time and energy. Like, if you're going to use it, track everything as accurate as possible. Now, I'm not saying put a load of pressure on yourself, but what I am saying to you, if you're going to use it and start working with the numbers, you want to make sure your numbers are as accurate as possible, really. So what I'm referring to here with the penny jar, it's almost like having a penny jar filled up of a load of pennies and looking at it from across the room and guessing how many pennies are in that penny jar is kind of pointless because, well, you're not going to get it right 9 times out of 10. However, if you go across to that penny jar, start counting those pennies one by one and get an accurate picture of where you're at, that's essentially the best way to use MyFitnessPal. Is we want to essentially use your food, any bit of food and beverage that you have, class them as pennies and log it and count it one by one. So when it comes to your tracking with MyFitnessPal, if you're going to do it, the only way I suggest you do it is to track as best and as accurate as possible, individually counting your pennies. So whether that means, well, actually a couple of members messaged me last week. They went and bought some sort of like digital scales, kitchen weighing scales to have on the side. So they can just quickly, they know roughly, how much pasta or whatever they're having or whatnot. So when it comes to putting into their MyFitnessPal, they've got obviously a more accurate picture of how many calories, because if they had 100 grams of pasta, that's obviously got more or double the amount of calories than 50 grams of pasta. So ideally you want to know. So that's my first tip. If you're going to do it, let's do it properly. And that also means like any alcohol and stuff, putting that in as accurate as possible. I'm not sure if this particular member's on the call tonight, but I think it was before Christmas. I had a nutrition coaching with one of the members. I won't say who it was. And at the weekend, I think I'm right in saying this, she had 12 porn star martinis. And I was like, well, firstly, like, how the hell are you having 12 porn star martinis and you're still standing at the end of the night? Which actually I don't think she was. Then also her second point was, well, how do I track that? And then she was too worried about getting it as accurate as possible, finding these particular ingredients of these 12 porn star martinis. I said, don't worry about the getting it as accurate as possible in this particular case. Just put something in. So I said, let's just put in 12 shots of vodka or something like that. So when it comes to your tracking, yes, get it as accurate as possible. But if you do find, you're struggling with that accuracy, don't just not put something in because that particular member just didn't include that, which obviously massively skews her calorie count for that week. Put something in, even if there's a guess. So let's say you have a Chinese at the weekend and you can't find that, you're not sure how to put that in on MyFitnessPal. Type in on MyFitnessPal, Tesco's Chinese takeaway or Tesco's chicken chow mein or something, and put that in. It's probably a ready meal, but just put it in just so you've got something in there. All right, so that's because they're common ones that come up, those I guess 2 points. Number 3, this is a big one. This is actually from that same member. It must have not been that particular week with the porn star martinis, but this is a screenshot of all you need to be worried about is your weekly average. So if you look at the screen now, on the right-hand side, you've got that average bar graph. It doesn't matter if some days you go higher, some days you go lower. All that matters is you get your average calories right. Now, I'm assuming for all of you, you all know how many calories you should roughly be having. If you don't know, just drop me a message because the InBody scanner will give us a good idea of that. But all that matters is the average calories. So some days you go higher, some days you go lower. So that also means you don't have to be perfect every day. If you want a couple of drinks on a Friday night or whatnot, when lockdown is over, you're out with the girls or whatnot on a Saturday night, you can crack on and do all of that. You just got to manage yourself accordingly, whereby maybe Monday to Thursday, you might just eat a little bit less because on a Friday and Saturday, you're going out bowling. All right. But you need to still make sure that that average calorie number is where it needs to be on whatever the calorie intake is for you to be in that energy deficit. All right, and that comes back to that first point of you accurately fitting everything in. Number three is the final point here is it could be a seasonal thing. So some of you might be using MyFitnessPal maybe for the first time. Some of you might have used it before, got great results off it, and then felt like after that, you kind of know what you're doing. and you kind of got to grip with things, you understand everything, and then you're coming back to it because it's January and we're all excited and we're all optimistic in January. So you might want to use it at certain times of the year, or maybe you've got a holiday booked in July. So in May and June, you might just want to tighten things up a little bit and come back to using MyFitnessPal. So there's sort of 3 key points. Think about the penny jar, count everything as accurately as possible. Maybe refer back to that porn star martini example I gave you a minute ago. So put everything in where you can. If you need to guess, it's better than nothing. Number 2 is the average calories is really the most important and the main graph that we're looking at here. And by the way, to get to this point in your app, off the top of my head, you go into the app, you go into more, or the 3 little lines in the top left corner, depending on what phone you have, an Android or an iPhone. You then go down to nutrition. Once you click on nutrition, it will pop up. But that little drop down where on my screen here it says week view with the date beneath it, it will probably say day view. Click on it and you best change it from a day view to a week view, and then make sure you're just looking at it in the macros tab. Now you'll see here at the top. Yeah, so that macro, when my mouse is hovering over now, you want it into that macros tab. You want to make sure it's not in a day view. You want to make sure it's in a week view. And then all you're looking at is making sure you're filling in as accurate as you can. You're getting the calorie intake right there on that average graph there. All right, so to end this one, I've spoke quite a lot about that. 35 minutes past. So to take a pick of this slide if you want. So here we should now understand why and how MyFitnessPal could benefit your fat loss goals. I guess a key thing of what I wanted to get across tonight, you're not just doing it because I've told you to do it. You've thought about what you're willing and what you're not willing to do. You've thought about the whole ball leg scale, and then you figured out, right, what I'm willing to try MyFitnessPal and have a go at it. Because like I said at the start, there's plenty of ways to skin the cat. There's loads of other things that we could do. This is just one particular way. And whilst we're not meeting face to face, it's a good way to put things across by starting with MyFitnessPal. Number 2, you've had a bit of a mindset shift of initially not worrying too much about what you're eating. So sack off all the dry Januaries, that sort of stuff. I'm only joking. Joking, but not joking. You've had a mindset shift from what you're eating to actually let's use maybe MyFitnessPal in this case as just a tool, that trace and paper metaphor, to start logging everything and start seeing exactly how much food I'm having and sort of see where I am. And then you can sort of start to match that to your results. If you're getting good results, your calorie intake is roughly about right. If you're not, then we can have a conversation about how we can potentially change training on nutrition. And how to use it effectively, that penny jar metaphor, so track everything as accurate as possible. Number 2, your calories. So it's looking at your weekly average, so making sure you're hitting that target I just spoke about. It's on the screen again there. And then 3, maybe use it as a seasonal approach, not overusing it, but just using it in times when you feel it's needed, such as now, the start of the new year. All right. Hopefully that gives you a bit of a breakdown of kind of where we're coming from with MyFitnessPal and how to use it. Let's move on. So I've definitely, bear with me a sec. Let me see if I can change this. I've definitely put on the slides of an older. I changed it earlier. Right, now let's just leave it. Let's just go on. I'll read it out from my sheet. So the presentation I've put on here is I made 2 copies. I slightly changed one earlier. So the topics on the next bit, I know you can't see it on your screen, but the topic we're looking at next is we're going to come into our habits. And the first part we're going to look at is a great question to ask ourselves. I'll come to that in a minute. And then the second part is how to build new habits. And then hopefully the outcome from this next part of the webinar is to understand 5 rules of building effective habits. So this is a good quote I like to come back to, and it's long-term consistency needs short-term intensity. All right, so I'll say that again. Long-term consistency needs short-term intensity. And what we're really talking about here is, well, I'm not saying that short-term diets or dry January again, it doesn't work. There's pros and cons towards all that sort of stuff. I understand why people do it. But when it comes to those short-term approaches, it comes back to that same point that I touched on earlier, is that when that's done with, when that short-term diet is finished with, how do you get yourself out of that restriction? Again, like that dry January, coming back to that, it's like, well, you're going to be having some alcohol at some point. How do you then introduce that? And I know that's it can get more serious with actual diet stuff. You know, if people have been cutting out loads of calories and loads of carbohydrates, and they go on some of these like 800 calorie diets that see flying about, you know, how do they reintroduce that? And I know people who have struggled with that, and after that, it then has a knock-on effect on their how they emotionally attach to nutrition, and it all becomes a bit more of a deeper thing when they've got so much negative attachments to nutrition. So that's why I'm a big focus on sort of long-term consistent habits, opposed to short-term wins where we're trying to drop weight quickly, cut things out, because in the long run, it doesn't get great results in the long run. Most people put that weight back on, but also it starts to feed into a negative approach and negative attachments to nutrition, which for a mindset, mental health thing isn't the best way to go about it, obviously. So a good question to ask yourself when you're following any approach to anything really, but obviously we're talking in the realm of nutrition here, is, can I see myself following this approach in 6 months' time? And obviously if the answer is yes, then that's all good. And if the answer is no, then first of all, why is it a no? And then if you're carrying on with it anyway, well, really, should you be following that approach? So that's the question you want to ask yourself, and then kind of make decisions from there. And that's why, like last week, I spoke about these nutrition habits. That's why when it comes to like nutrition rules, these 3 rules are a good point to start. So start with those single ingredient foods 80% of the time, be flexible 20% of the time, and track your food and hit your targets, because those 3 isn't a diet. They will fit into any of your preferences, whether you're vegan or whatever. It will fit into your lifestyle. You're not bound by certain ways or times or particular rules, coming back to that horse blinker metaphor. They'll fit into your lifestyle, and it will fit into your individual tastes and needs as well. And also, like when you're following those particular rules, you don't have to be perfect. It's all about gradually building on better habits over time. So when it comes to a habit, what's the definition? A habit is a behavior that we want to put on autopilot. So therefore, if we can eventually generate new and positive habits which are going to move the needle in a positive direction, then that's obviously going to be a vital part to getting long-term good results. So when designing a habit, here are 5 fundamental rules. So whenever you think about generating a new habit, you always want to come back to these 5 rules. So if you're one to take notes, or if you're one to kind of take a picture using your phone, take a picture of the screen, and I'm going to touch on these in a minute. These are the kind of the ways we want to, these are our building blocks to build a habit. So we've got, it has to be obvious, has to be frequent, it needs to be triggered, it needs to be achievable, and we want to have 100% control. And these things might sound like really obvious or almost like I'm spoon feeding you, but I think a lot of the time we actually forget about it, and we just rush into things and we make decisions because we're feeling optimistic or whatnot, and we then wonder why didn't I actually sustain that particular habit? Well, it's because you didn't set it up in the right way in the first place. You just kind of rushed into something, again, horse blinkers, and didn't actually kind of figure things out initially. and get yourself set up with the right approach. So first of all, your habit has to be obvious. So you must first of all understand, it must make sense to you that you need sort of like why you're putting this habit into place and how it's going to positively affect your goals. So if something is too complicated or you do not understand, or someone has said something to you, it might even be me, you don't understand, you're way less likely to go follow ahead with it. And in this particular case, if something's too complicated, well, therefore you've got less control because you don't understand everything. And therefore, if you've got less control, well, you've got a lot lower chance of actually designing and cracking on with that new habit. So a good example here is I'm going to track my food every day throughout lockdown using approach X, maybe in this case, using MyFitnessPal. That is a clear habit. It's a clear behavior and a clear action. And we probably, or hopefully all now understand the benefit of that and how it positively links to achieving maybe a goal of a particular goal, a fat loss goal, which you might have set last week. And a quick one on that note, remember last week I spoke about goals and we spoke about how to build a goal and process goals as well, how to set a proper goal. So refer back to that. And part 2 is ideally it's frequent. So depending on what it is, ideally you do it every day, or maybe I was thinking about this earlier, and when it comes to like your training, maybe someone would do it every day because they could be like, right, well, if my habit was something to do with exercise, and therefore it was right, I'm going to do a few Zoom sessions or PT sessions per week, but then to make sure I do something every day, I'm just going to go out for a walk, or I'm just going to do 10 minutes here or 10 minutes there. So potentially you could do it every day, or maybe in the case of exercise, you're doing it 3, 4, 5 times a week. But in this particular case, again, if it is exercise, like using this as an example, don't leave it all to the end of the week, because then you're just going to start. That's not the right way to go about it, because essentially you're just trying to chunk it all together and trying to cram it in maybe at the weekend, which something probably more appetizing is going to come up at the weekend anyway, and then you're going to wonder why you're not getting any exercise done. So you've got to hold yourself accountable to and schedule it properly and appropriately, whereby you can be frequent enough with this new habit. A good way to make sure you build a new habit is to make sure it's already triggered by something in our environment. All right, so a really good example of this is like your toothbrush in the morning. When you get up and you go and do whatever you do, whatever your normal routine is in the morning, you see your toothbrush. That is a good example of a trigger. Oh yeah, I need to brush my teeth. And then by now, we're all in that position in our life where it's just a normal thing. And then from there, habit stacking is a great way to essentially use an existing behavior to try and trigger the formation of a new habit. So for example, let's bring it back to like filling in your nutrition tracker. Someone's telling me, well, I keep forgetting to do it. Well, then maybe a good thing to do is to use a habit that you've already got in place, such as turning the oven on every night to cook your food. Leave a post-it note by the side of the oven. So every time you turn on the oven and start making your dinner for that evening, you also fill in your habit tracker. So the turning on the oven, having that post-it note there, you're using that habit that's already in place, you're stacking on top of that, or almost piggybacking that habit to build this new habit of filling in your habit tracker. Or something like the whole nutrition tracker thing, like setting an alarm on your phone for a particular time of day. That's quite a good one. So your alarm goes off at a particular time and that reminds you to fill it in. But that's a slightly different example. If we're talking about habit stacking, there's a good example for you there. And then again, it sounds simple, but I think again, coming back to maybe the whole dry January thing again, it's not always, we don't set things that are always achievable. So in this particular case, what I'm saying to you is, right, score yourself on a confidence level of 1 to 10. So if you said, right, I'm going to do my habit tracker this week on a scale of, 1 to 10, I need to be like a 9 or a 10 out of 10 to make sure I follow through with that. If I'm a 6, a 7, or an 8, I'm probably not confident enough it's actually going to happen. So therefore, I maybe need to address that habit and make it simpler to make sure I actually follow through with it. Because right now, many things when it comes to your health and fitness might feel really achievable. It's January, we're thumbs up, it's optimistic, we've got high levels of motivation. But what about when that motivation drops and that willpower drops? You know, are we still going to get that habit done? And most probably not. So you need to make sure you're setting yourself up with a habit which almost feels like too easy to complete, like it's impossible that you won't do it. And that's a good place to start. But all too common, we set ourselves up with these habits which might be fueled by the optimism and the motivation we're currently feeling because it's January or whatnot. But when that motivation soon dies down, what's going to be the fuel to drive that habit still? And that's where you want to think about is how achievable is this goal? And that's why a lot of the time I talk people down on things and say, right, no, let's just slow it down. Let's just focus on 1 or 2 things at a time and then build up from there. And that's why I have that approach. Some of you members, that will resonate with you. From there, we want to make sure we have 100% control. So again, it sounds simple, but when designing habits, you need to make sure you have full ownership. So maybe having the habit of, or setting a goal of, I'm going to sleep 8 hours every night. Maybe that's not 100% in your control because of those examples I put here. You might not be able to fall asleep. There might be a couple of other things going on, or the kids keep you up. But what can you control around your sleep? All right, well, I can maybe control my sleep routine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to not be on my phone and have blue light for 30 minutes before bed, or I'm going to get in the bath and chill out, or I'm going to read a book, you know. So what I'm alluding to there is maybe focus on behaviors, maybe not the outcome. Sleeping 8 hours is an outcome. It's something you're going to achieve. Maybe you just want to focus on the routines again, or the habits or behaviors. That will give you more control, because you're more in control of your habits and behaviors that no one else is, than maybe the particular outcome. And then from there, I just thought I'd put like a coaching example of how that might look. So first things first, when it comes to building on habits and building better habits, well, option A is, first of all, do you actually need to introduce another habit? I had a brief conversation with someone this week where maybe right now just focusing on their training wasn't enough for them. They felt like they maybe needed to do more. Well, she's got enough going on in her life already. Just focusing on the training side of things and getting that as a habit is a good starting point. You don't need to be generating a load of new habits all at once, such as training habits and nutrition habits. So focus, bring it back to that ball leg scale that I've mentioned a few times and mentioned last week. However, if you do want to build a new habit, and in this particular case, it might be something to do with nutrition, and then the habit might be, well, I want to do a better job of preparing my meals. Well, then, like I said a minute ago, start small. You know, if you're turning on the oven tonight and cooking some dinner for tonight, well, can you make a little bit extra for tomorrow's lunch, instead of setting yourself the expectation is I need to prep all my meals for the following week, or I need to get super organized. You know, start small and use that piggyback method like I mentioned there. So we're making dinner tonight, make it a little extra, or while stuff's in the oven, make something different for tomorrow's lunch. You know, use that time, piggyback that time that you're already using to make tonight's dinner. And then make sure you've got a high confidence level. So starting maybe with just tomorrow's lunch is a much higher confidence level than, right, I'm going to prep for the whole week and get myself organized there. You know, so sometimes you've got to step back a little bit and not give yourself too much to do. Make sure it's achievable. This slide is here. So my last slide tonight, one of the benefits of this lockdown, or the 3 lockdowns, is me, Mike, and Patrick are getting through a lot of content and a lot of books. If you're interested in habits and psychology, behavior change, I know a lot of us guys in the Facebook group, we message a little bit back and forth about the books and stuff that we read, and we've got a big bookshelf here at the gym. This is a good one to take a look at when it comes to habits and behavior change. So it's by James Clear, Atomic Habits. Get it off the Amazon and take a read of that. And that takes into consideration some of the the points that I've gone through tonight when building habits. So if you're interested in looking a little bit more detail at that, I would urge you to buy that book. And that's it for tonight, guys. So I'm aware I've chatted on for about 53 minutes. So hopefully you've taken some content away from that tonight, whether it's regards to your tracking and your MyFitnessPal and where to focus your energy, diet principles. Remember, big thing from that is that tracing paper mindset shift of kind of focusing not so much on what you're having too much, but actually have a tool in place to give you that tracing paper and give you that direction and give you that guidance and measure that alongside your results. And then when it comes back to it's frozen. When it comes back to your habits, start here with designing a habit. You've got those 5 key fundamental rules to a habit, and that's where we start. I'm going to stop chatting on. I'm going to leave you to your evening. Hopefully, like I said a minute ago, you've found this useful tonight. We are doing them every week, so there'll be new topics next week. So I hope to see some of you guys next week. All right. So have a good week. If we don't see you on Zoom, I'm sure we'll catch up at some point. All right.
See you later.
Take care, guys.
See you. Bye.